recent polling of U.S. citizens state that the American people think that we are in a recession. Mainstream economists have dismissed the idea that the United States is in a recession. Traditional economic indicators show that the economy is doing well. Economists coined the term vibecession to indicate the discrepancy between the American people's perception of the economy and the economic numbers. Mainstream economists pushed the idea that the American people think the economy is doing worse than it actually is, that the people don't realize how good the economy is doing. But is the economy actually doing well? The answer is supposedly yes, and the economists have pointed to statistics such as unemployment and the GDP growth to back it up. One such person who argues that the numbers prove the economy is doing well is President Joe Biden. Of course he is saying this, he is president. Even though I haven't heard President Biden himself use the term vibecession, he has definitely joined the bandwagon that the mainstream economists are using, stating that the economy isn't doing as bad as the American people think it is. The funny thing is, back in mid-2022, the U.S. economy suffered 2 consecutive quarters of GDP decline. By definition, this amounted to a recession, but we averted a recession because the President of the United States ignored the GDP statistics. He changed the definition of what a recession is. When the economic indicators stated that we were in a recession, Joe Biden overrode it with his own vibes about the economy. But when the American people have vibes about the economy, that doesn't count somehow? To be fair, Joe Biden and the economists who work for him in the Treasury Department back in mid-2022, they didn't dismiss statistics completely. They simply looked at different economic indicators. So instead of looking at the GDP, they looked at the unemployment numbers, the consumer spending, and the gross domestic income. The growth in the gross domestic income was used to justify that we weren't in a recession in mid-2022, but by definition, it's the GDP, or gross domestic product, that determines whether or not we are in a recession. They simply looked at different indicators to determine whether or not the economy was doing well, other than the official indicators. Well, 2 can play at that game. Currently, the Biden administration is denying that we are in a recession by citing economic indicators. I will cite my own economic indicators to see how well the economy is doing. If Joe Biden doesn't want to look at GDP, I don't have to look at GDP to determine whether we are in a recession or not. Maybe the economy that the American people are experiencing in their day-to-day lives is not reflected in the GDP. Just because unemployment numbers are down doesn't mean that the American people have good employment prospects. The Biden administration and the mainstream economists are trying to tell the American people that they are wrong about the U.S. currently being in a recession. I wish to let the professional economists know that the United States economy is doing poorly because there are economic statistics that you could look at to justify the American people having bad vibes. Joe Biden gauged the economic well-being on his vibes, so his constituents' vibes should also count. Hello, I am the Knight of the Basilisk. In this video, I might not be citing my sources the same way as I did in my previous videos. In my previous videos, I would just put a link to all the citations in the description, but sometimes it was getting difficult to fit everything in the character limit of the description, and there are a lot of sources for this video, so if I cite an article, I might show it on screen if I am not able to fit it in this description, or even if it's in the description, I might put it on screen anyways. Anyways, let's start with the percent of people who can't cover a $400 emergency. So, citing 2 articles, one from fortune.com and one from finance.yahoo.com, those 2 articles state that around 37% of people can't readily cover a $400 expense without going into debt, etc. And this is as of May and June of 2023. So not that long ago. It's just a year before I'm recording this video. Here is probably one of the worst numbers I'm about to show you. The income needed to live in the United States and to afford a middle class lifestyle versus the U.S. median wage. I will cite articles about both the cost of living and the salaries that Americans make, but first let's look at the cost of living side of it. I wasn't able to find a single statistic for the cost of living in the entire US, so I had to rely on articles that broke down the cost of living by state. And I found two such articles, both dated April 2024, so pretty recently. SmartAsset.com broke down the cost of living by state, and I cannot go over all 50 states. And I didn't get an average, but let's just look at the least expensive state. The least expensive state was West Virginia at $78,790 for a single adult to live a normal life. And that's about $37.88 an hour. Again, this is the least expensive state. So you can read the article to get the statistics for the other states, but they just get more expensive from there. I found a CNN article that didn't provide a comprehensive cost of living so much as it showed the median income needed to afford a house in each state. Again, I can't go over each and every single state, so I'll just give the least expensive state, which was Mississippi at $63,000 a year. And of course, you can read their article to look at the other states. It just gets more expensive from there. And I also have another article from smartasset.com on the cost of living in urban areas in the US. Dated March 2024, it stated that it costs $96,500 a year to live comfortably in a major US city. Now let's look at the average salary in the US. According to an article by the St. Louis Fed, the median personal income in 2022 was $40,480 a year. The U.S. Census shows the median household income, so this is the income for the entire household, was $74,580 in the year 2022. Keep in mind the article I mentioned earlier that stated the state with the cheapest cost of living was West Virginia at $78,000 a year. That was the cost for a single individual. And of course, that was the cheapest state. It only gets higher from there. And that is still higher than the median household income, according to the US Census. I also found an article from MSN.com that had a breakdown comparing the cost of living versus the median household salary for 100 US cities. So city by city, for 100 cities, it gives you the cost of living for that city and the average salary. And in each instance, the cost of living far exceeded the salary. And the title of the article states that the salary numbers presented are for individuals, but when you read the article, it seems like they actually meant to say it's by household. That's just what I got when I read it. And you can read the article yourself to make your own judgment about what they meant. So what this means is that simply living is too expensive for the average American. Getting a job literally doesn't pay the bills. And that is something that might explain the workforce participation numbers, which I will explain later in this video. So let's look at the people who are rent burdened. According to an article from NPR, in 2022, a record half of U.S. renters paid more than 30% of their income for housing purposes. And among the people who worked full-time, when you count just full-time workers, a third of them were still cost burdened. And for people making under $30,000 a year, 83% of those people were cost burdened. And for the people making under $30,000 a year, typically, after the cost of rent and housing, those people usually had about $310 a month to live off of after they paid for their housing. I cite a report from the Joint Center of Housing Studies, and I put the link in the description to the webpage that then links to the article. But I found the article hard to read, so I also cited an article from Fortune.com that talks about the report. So this report from the Joint Center of Housing Studies, as described by Fortune.com, which really delved into the details of what the report said, states that among homeowner households, 1 in 4 are basically rent burden, as in 1 in 4 households are spending more than 30% of their cost on housing. And I also cite an article from NPR, which is dated at the end of 2023. 15.5% of homes that were available for sale in the U.S. were affordable to the typical household, which means the average American would only be able to afford just 15.5% of homes for sale, assuming they wanted to pay no more than 30% of their income on housing. And of course, San Francisco's affordability was incredibly low. Quote, just 0.3% of homes for sale in 2023 were affordable to the typical Bay Area household. End quote. A lot of people are talking about how good the stock market is. However, if we a disproportionate amount of stock market growth is just in the top 20 companies. So on the screen, I'll be showing you articles, and I hopefully I'll have room to link these in the description. But basically, if you took away the top 20 performing companies in the stock market, these articles will talk about how much the stock market will drop if it wasn't for these top 20 performing companies. So basically, there's stock market growth, and there's like thousands of all these publicly traded companies, but most of them aren't really contributing to the stock market growth proportionally to how it is growing. Just 20 stocks are responsible for a large chunk of that stock market growth. So the next time you hear people talking about how good the stock market is, just remember that a lot of the stock market numbers is just 20 stocks. Now, I'm about to talk about zombie companies. A zombie company is a company that is so burdened by the cost of paying off their debt that just paying off their monthly debt payments does not leave them with any more money to grow. So most of their profits or all of the profits go to just paying off their monthly debt payments. So what percent of publicly traded companies in the United States are considered zombie companies? So I have contradictory numbers of how many companies in the United States that are publicly traded are zombie companies. So let's look at the numbers I do have. So according to AP News, there's about 2,000 companies that are considered zombie companies, or were considered zombie companies in 2023. And this is up from 1,500 back in 2013. So in a 10-year period, the number has increased by 1/3. Now, and according to like the graph they show in the article, potentially up to 40% of companies are zombie companies, but it's hard to tell. Like I'm not quite sure if I read the graph correctly because it's not very precise, but it could be as many as 40% of companies that they had data for. And of course, and this is just for companies that they had the data for. And maybe this does not represent all U.S. companies. I don't know. Then from Fortune.com, it gives a whole bunch of different numbers. It gives anywhere from 10% to 13% to 25%. And that's because economists don't always agree. But either way, it's somewhere between 10% and 25% of companies in the United States that are publicly traded are zombie companies. There are no good go-to numbers, but even just 10% of the companies in the United States being zombie companies isn't good. But if the number is up to 25 or even 40%, that's really bad. Now, if the American people are having a hard time simply affording to live, and there are so many zombie companies, what about bankruptcy rates? So I don't have percentages of bankruptcies. What I do have is just the total numbers. So in 2022, there were 378,390 bankruptcy filings. This is individual people filing for bankruptcies and businesses filing for bankruptcies. So it's a total number. I don't have a breakdown. But the scary thing is this number rose to 445,186 bankruptcies in 2023. That's right. And this is from Reuters.com that this information came from. It's from a January 2024 article. What about student loan debt? So the numbers I found, and these were from articles from 2024. One was Forbes.com. One was from Statista.com. So Forbes.com says a total of $1.75 trillion in total student loan debt was owed, which was $28,950 owed per borrower on average, if you average it out among all the borrowers. And the article from Forbes explained that over the past 30 years, the tuition, when adjusted for inflation, went from roughly $4,000 to $10,000 for a 4-year public college, and $19,000 to $38,000 at private nonprofit institutions. And this is adjusted for inflation. So when you adjust for inflation, the cost has doubled. And according to Statista.com, it has a similar number, 1.73 trillion of US dollars held by student loan borrowers. But that article also explained that government aid meant to help pay for college has not kept up with the cost either. And it also explained that over 46 million Americans had a student loan debt balance, with the average borrower owing about $30,000, which is close to what the Forbes article stated. But when you don't look up just the average cost per borrower, when you divide the 1.73 trillion by 335 million, that's right, 335 million, which is a rounded estimate of the total U.S. population, including elderly and children, so including people who aren't really paying many taxes, the student loan amount per capita in the U.S. is $5,223.88. If you divided the 1.73 trillion held by student loan borrowers and divided it by just the taxpayers, that's fewer people to divide it among, so it would probably be more per person. So the percent of people living with their parents. According to BusinessInsider.com, about 18% of men and 12% of women aged 25 to 34 were living with their parents in 2022. And they're citing this from the U.S. Census Bureau. But also, what they're also citing from the U.S. Census Bureau is roughly 48% of 18 to 29-year-olds are living with their parents. So there's like two separate numbers, 25 to 34-year-olds and 18 to 29-year-olds. So the people between the ages of 25 and 29 will show up in both numbers. I also wanted to give you the percent of people working 2 or more jobs. So Biden cited the gross domestic income as a reason why we were not in a recession in mid-2022. However, if the growth in the gross domestic income was due to people having more than one job, does that just mean that it's harder, people work more for less? Here's the problem with the getting that percentage of people working 2 or more jobs. I've read articles on the internet lately that showed that there are people who are working 2 or more jobs in secret. That is, they have 2 employers, but each employer thinks they're the sole employer of the employee. So the person doesn't tell either employer that they have another job. And they're keeping this double employment a secret from their employer, so how is this supposed to be reflected in the number of people working 2 or more jobs? But within the official numbers, there is a problem. I will cite the 2013 official numbers, even though they're pretty dated, because it shows the discrepancy I'm talking about. So according to the St. Louis Fed, 4.9% of people in 2013 were working 2 or more jobs. According to the U.S. Census, that number was 8.3. And again, this is still for the year 2013. So You can see how the St. Louis Fed and the U.S. Census have different numbers for 2013. If the official numbers can agree for the year 2013, what makes you think I can get a more reliable number for a more recent year? Even though I can't give you official numbers, what I can give you is the results of a survey done by Newsweek. What Newsweek found with its survey is that 36% of people rely on a second job or a side gig to make ends meet. And 48% of people ages 18 to 27, almost half of the people ages 18 to 27, have a side gig, which I'm assuming is in addition to a normal job. I mean, just in regards to the context of the larger article. But this number is high. It shows that people can't make ends meet with a single wage. Basically, going to work and earning a paycheck isn't enough to pay the bills. You need something more than just going to work and getting a paycheck. But here's another worrying number. The number of people who just dropped out of the workforce, who aren't unemployed because they're not looking for work. And I just want you to research the U6. The U6, and it's U-6. It represents the different types of unemployment calculations. So there's the official unemployment number, but that's the amount of people looking for work who can't find work. So if you've been looking for work for 1 or more years, you're not considered unemployed. But there's different unemployment numbers. So there's numbers that do include people who've been looking for work for more than a year, and people and numbers that don't. So there's 6 different unemployment numbers. I'm not looking at any of those. I'm looking at the people who just dropped out of the workforce. And from Newsweek.com, it cites the Bureau of Labor Statistics and found that in a 2024 article, it says 89% of working age men have a job or are actively looking for work. And in 1950, that number was 97%. So I've just cited a whole bunch of numbers that don't make the U.S. economy look well, but there's one more thing I want to cite. It is from tradingeconomics.com, and it states that currently, as of December 2022, so not that long ago, and the website might update to show more recent numbers. It might update after the recording of this video. According to tradingeconomics.com, government spending accounts for 37% of GDP growth as of December 2022. So the next time the government talks about GDP growth, keep in mind that's a lot of taxpayer money fueling the GDP growth. 37% of people can't readily cover a $400 expense. The average cost to live in a U.S. city far exceeds the actual median income for that city. Half of U.S. renters are rent burdened, and 1 in 4 homeowners are cost burdened for shelter purposes. Just 15.5% of homes available for sale in recent times were affordable to the average American. A disproportionately high amount of stock market growth in recent times is due to just 20 companies. There are somewhere between 10% and 25% of companies that are in the US that are considered zombie companies. This number might actually be as high as 40, though. The total amount of bankruptcy filings, including for individual households and for companies, rose about 17 or 18% from 2022 to 2023. There's about $1.73 trillion in total student loan debt, which is almost $30,000 per borrower, or about $5,000 per American, including non-taxpayers. Almost half of Americans under 30 years old live with their parents. About 10% of working age men have completely stopped looking for work and have decided not to participate in the labor force. These are all bad statistics. Okay, so the GDP grew. Okay, so the unemployment numbers are low. Well, yeah, of course the unemployment numbers are low when it doesn't count people just not looking for work. Imagine if those 10% of working age men who don't want to work, imagine if they tried coming back into the workforce, unemployment would spike. The economy is bad. I don't care what Joe Biden says. I do care what the American people say. Yes, they are right to say that we are in a recession, because the American people are in a recession. There's the economy. The economy is not in a recession. But how much of the economy represents the American people? As I've mentioned in a previous video, the American household budget is like a pie graph. You have a part of the pie graph to represent the necessities, and the part of the pie that represents discretionary spending. And the discretionary spending is shrinking, and so Americans are just having a hard time affording the basics. So, of course, the economy doesn't represent the spending of the average American. The average American can't afford anything anymore. The average American is having a harder time participating in the economy. So yes, they say the economy is doing bad because they can't participate in it. There are two more things that I want to mention before I end this video. Do you remember earlier in this video how I mentioned that there was a disproportionate amount of stock market growth just within 20 companies? Well, it's been that way for a while. First, there were the FAANG stocks, FAANG, and then the Magnificent Seven, which are the top 7 stocks. Either way, I have read articles over the past few years that talks about the profitability of these companies. The top performing companies in the stock market include companies that aren't even profitable. The amount of profit a company makes varies from year to year, and you know, some companies are more profitable than others. So I could not go into detail in this video, but you can do your own research on a company, say Amazon, and see if they were a company that was actually profitable even during the year that they were top performing. So just remember, among the top performing stock companies, that doesn't necessarily mean they're even profitable. If they keep the stock market afloat, what's keeping them afloat? And again, I didn't want to go into too much detail about these companies, but you can do your own research. The second thing I want to mention is that if this video interests you, then I believe that there are 4 other YouTube videos that you might like. Remember how I said I wanted to look at economic indicators other than the GDP? Well, there's a YouTube channel called Economics Explained that released a video explaining why GDP is not a good economic indicator. There are 3 other YouTube channels, What If Alt Hist, Redacted, and Peter Gunther, and they all have their own ideas about how well the economy is doing. And I'll hopefully show you the thumbnail on screen. I just think that these videos appeal to the type of person that would have been interested in this video that you've just watched. Anyways, I am the Knight of the Basilisk. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.